Audio on demand from Vision Christian Media.
Jesus said, "If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free."
If you were to tie a piece of cotton around me, I could break it easily. In fact, if you were to tie a piece of cotton around me twice, I could easily break free. But if you were to keep twining the cotton around my body, there would be a point where I couldn't break free. Addiction is like that. You can take a substance once and you can walk away from it. But if you keep going back to that substance, there comes a time when you're under the power of addiction. You're brought into bondage and captivity to that very thing. It's the same with forms of behaviour. I can behave in a certain way once, but if I continue to practice that form of behaviour, there comes a point when it is addictive. And Jesus said that he has come to set the captive free. There are countless testimonies of people that have been addicted to all kinds of things, and yet Jesus has set them free. And remember, he said, if the Son shall set you free, you will be free indeed.
This is Set Free with Ken Legg.
And welcome once again to Set Free with Ken Legg. I'm Phil Edwards, and this week we're looking at the subject of addictive behaviour. And as I sip on my coffee, Ken, it's quite a wide-ranging subject, isn't it? You can be addicted to all sorts of things: alcohol, drugs, nicotine, gambling, pornography, the list goes on.
Yes, you mentioned coffee there. I certainly have a likeness for coffee, but as I keep telling my friends, I can give it up anytime I want.
Let me just have another one.
But seriously, there are those obvious addictions that you spoke about, but then, of course, there are respectable addictions, such as work. Some people are workaholics. They work, but they just keep working. They work and they bring their work home. They go to their office or their shed or whatever it is and just don't stop working.
Shopping would be another one, I guess.
Shopping, or as the ladies like to call it, RT, retail therapy. But exercise is another one. People get a certain high by exercising. They releases those, what they call them, the happy hormones, those endorphins, and people actually get a bit of a trip on that, and can get addicted to exercise.
I'll never understand those people.
What about ministry? Some people minister, but others minister because they have a need to be needed or whatever. In fact, I was going through a list of different kinds of addiction. This lady came up to me afterwards. I was speaking at a public meeting, She came up to me afterwards. She said, "What about the internet?" She said, my son is addicted to the internet. He's on it from the time he gets up in the morning until the time he goes to bed in the evening. In fact, I heard of another one just recently. Have you ever heard of nomophobia? Nomophobia. It's the fear of not having a mobile phone.
Yeah, actually, that's a very real thing for a lot of people, that they feel very anxious when they don't have their phone with them, which is kind of crazy. You think back to, you and I are old enough to remember not having mobile phones, and how on earth did we get on,
Exactly.
Life did go on, didn't it?
But people can be addicted to that kind of thing.
I heard someone say recently, actually, you can be addicted to your friends.
Right.
You've just got to have that social interaction all the time. And there's plenty of things that we could list. How do you actually define an addiction, though? You talk about exercise as a good thing, for example. We should do that. And yes, we might get enjoyment out of it. But at what point does something like that, or any of the other things that we mentioned, actually become an addiction?
Well, my definition of addiction is a compulsive or obsessive relationship to a substance, person, behaviour or thing. I'll say that again. Okay. A compulsive or obsessive relationship to a substance, person, behaviour or thing. Now, there's a difference between an addiction and a habit. I believe personally that God has given us the power of habit so that we can do mundane things without really thinking about them. I mean, you get up in the morning, put your shirt on, you're not thinking about which button goes into which buttonhole. Yeah. It's automatically. Why? Because you're thinking about the more important things.
And there are good habits that we should get into, isn't there?
That's right. But of course, Satan has hijacked the power of habit and replaced it with addiction, so that people will get into bondage to certain lifestyles and things like we talked about earlier on. So if you want to differentiate between a habit and an addiction, I would say that an addiction is characterized by three things. Number one is bondage. At the beginning of the program, I gave that illustration about the piece of cotton. There comes a point where people can't actually give it up. They can't get free of it. It is something that is controlling their lives. Peter says, by whom, or if you like, by what a person is overcome, by that he is also brought into bondage. So an important aspect of our salvation is that Jesus came to set us free from every kind of enslavement.
And you think about that cotton example, you get to a point where you literally cannot get out. There's nothing that you can do. but somebody external to you, in this case we're talking about Jesus, has the external power to come along with his scissors, so to speak, and cut those cotton cords to a point where you can break free.
Absolutely. That's the good news of the gospel.
Yeah. Okay, You mentioned 3. What's the next one?
Well, another characteristic of addiction is life domination. An addiction takes over just about every area of a person's life.
Yeah.
For example, a social drinker adjusts his habit to fit into his lifestyle. But an alcoholic adjusts his lifestyle to fit into his habit. That's the difference.
Yeah.
And it affects every aspect, every segment of if you like, of his life. It starts intruding into his family life, the way he relates to his family. It'll affect the way he performs at work. Of course, it'll affect his health, his liver or whatever. It'll affect his finances for sure. He's putting his hand in his pocket more and more to feed his habit, and it'll affect his social life. People will start withdrawing from him because they don't like that kind of behaviour or whatever, and so on and so forth. So it's life dominating.
Yeah, a great example of the financial impact. I'm not a smoker, but I was standing behind someone in the queue in Woolies the other day, and I couldn't believe it was $125 for a carton of cigarettes.
Wow.
But how on earth do they afford it? It was amazing. It's pretty tragic, though, when you see people being dominated like that, when it starts to ruin their lives, really. I guess you could say it's a bit like a virus or a cancer that starts to spread through their life. Would that be a fair comment?
I think it is. And of course, that leads us to the third characteristic, which is ultimately it leads to death. So maybe that analogy of cancer is a good one, because eventually it begins to not only dominate and take over every part of the body, but the end result is death. You think about that. We talked about different segments that an addiction can intrude into. Family. Some people have lost their marriage, their family, because of their addiction. Work. Some people lost their job because they just can't hold it down because they're so under the power of their addiction.
Yeah.
Health. That's an obvious one. You mentioned finances, social life. I mean, a person's whole life begins to die as a result of the power of addiction. And we know that, of course, the enemy is behind addiction, and the thief comes to steal, to kill, and destroy. And that's his goal. That's his end range purpose. Jesus come to give us life, but he's come to destroy life. And I always think that Romans 6 is a good chapter to comment on this whole subject of addictive behaviour, because it talks about the grace of God being the power to set us free, not only from the penalty of sin, but from the power of sin, so that we can actually live above addictive behaviour and so on. But then Paul goes on to talk about what happens if we choose not to avail ourselves of the grace of God. And he said, of course, there are certain consequences for that. In fact, he gives 3. First of all, he says that sin will make you a slave, as we've already said. In Romans 6 and verse 16, he says, do you not know that to whom you present yourselves to slaves to obey, you are under that one's power, whom you obey, whether of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness. So there's the obvious one that we've already spoken about, enslavement. And then in verse 21, he says that actually sin will lead to shame. In verse 21, he says, what fruit did you have in those things in which you are now ashamed? Addiction leads to behaviour that we're ashamed of. A lot of addictive behaviour is actually secretive because of that very thing. People are just ashamed of what they're doing. And the third characteristic of addictive behaviour, of course, is ultimately death. He goes on to say in that same verse, in verse 21, he says, for the end of those things is death. And so that's the power of addiction. It ends ultimately in death. It kills joy, it kills peace, it kills relationships, it kills dreams and goals in our life. And the ultimate fruit of all sin is death. But Christ comes in to give us life. And praise God, as you said, you illustrated it so perfectly earlier, Phil. He's the one that comes along and brings the scissors and cuts through that cotton that is so thick now that we can't break free of it, but his power can set the captive free. That's the good news.
We hope this discussion on addictive behaviour has been helpful for you today, and we'll have more tomorrow. Until then, remember, you don't have to carry that baggage. God wants you to be set free.
For books, DVDs, small group studies and other resources from Ken Legg, including the book This is the Life, which features topics from today's message, shop online at vision.org.au. That's vision.org.au. vision.org.au.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.